Hello, my name is Suzanne Eades-Willis. I'm the daughter of Mr. James William Eades, and he served with Operation Grapple on Christmas Island, 1957 and 1958. And it is a story which actually had a major impact on him mentally and physically, and it went on to have a major impact on my life, not only as a child, but clinically now I have multiple conditions. Years and years ago, when there first appeared to be a recognition of the Christmas Island soldiers, I asked my father to apply through the government to try to get some help or understanding with the experience he'd had. He was unwilling. In fact, he was unwilling to discuss anything really. We were banned from asking him about the land crabs. We were banned from asking him anything about the time in Christmas Island, but we know he went, and it was no secret that he went. He changed, I would imagine, whilst he was out there, because I have heard that he was a daddy type dad, and my dad was a father. He was a father insofar as he didn't have any patience if you didn't get something right straight away. I remember as a little girl going for a walk in the park in Kent, and it was snowy, and I was holding his hand and I cut my lip on the buckle of his motorbike boot up his leg. And I remember so clearly how he scolded me because I'd bled on his boots. And that was the end of the walk. That was just too much for him to handle. He did have numerous medical complications himself as a result, and I truly believe as a result. He had, well, it was one of his dying conditions, if you like. He had prostate cancer, which he had really quite badly. He had problems with the carotid sinus nerve in his neck, which just withered away, and that made him appear to have heart attacks, when in fact the heart itself was okay, but the neurological side to keeping the heart running correctly died back, and died in his, I would say that was in his early 40s. And we were fortunate that a consultant in London was doing some research on the carotid sinus nerve, and he spotted Dad, and for a long time he treated my father, and it sort of made life better. He had to stop work, but that wasn't of too much of a problem for him, because he followed other interests and business issues. But he couldn't seem to tolerate if other people were ill either. I became ill in my 30s.
What happened?
I was diagnosed with antiphospholipid syndrome and then lupus. And for a long while, when I went to St Thomas's Hospital and then on to Guy's Hospital, they said I must have some black African in my family history. And it was at the time when Ebola was kicking off, because my clinics I went to were basically West African or Caribbean ethnic minorities, and it was at a full clinic. And they always asked me if I'd been anywhere I could get Ebola, which they have now sort of settled down to the fact that I'm just a bit odd and have got it that way round. But I do have numerous problems, and I've had cancer, and about 10 days ago I was told I have a dying liver, which I need to cope with.
So when did you when you were growing up as a child, you knew nothing about your dad's service?
No, well, he used to say, like, when he was in the army, you had to do it like this. It was always a reference to when you were in the army, you did it like this.
But never anything about the atomic test, right?
As I got older, he did. And he said about this sort of famous bit, because my father was one of the Royal Engineers, and according to his service record, and what he did eventually say, was he was part of the group that cited and set these tests, and he was responsible because he was a chartered engineer just before he went into the Royal Engineers for National Service. And so he did say about that, and he did say that at one point they were told to put a damp towel over their head, like a tea towel-y type cloth, and he said they were always told to cover their faces with their hands. And I can't now obviously, but he would tell you how he could see his hands. He could see clearly all the bones in his hands, and the heat was unbearable. The heat was all consuming, and it would be used in reference, well, you can't complain today about the power cuts in the 1970s, early 80s. We put up with a lot worse. We had to do this day after day. And I know he didn't like the fact that birds just fell out the sky. It seemed to haunt him.
A lot of men talk about that from the tests.
Yeah, he said it was something coming down and landing by him that had been flying along, and then whoosh, gone. And he didn't like it. He, I think, felt quite tormented because for all his failings, Dad didn't like to leave or cause damage to the home environment, gardens, anything like that. And he would most certainly not have liked that with the birds. And he told us about the crabs, how they swarmed. He said it wasn't a case of stepping over them, they swarmed. They covered the roads, they covered the sands. The one thing that I have found is strange, and I've not been able to find out further. One surprise thing that came to me as a surprise in his service record, which isn't much, it's a lot of black felt tip, but there was one statement that he spoke fluent French, and yet when I was struggling with French at school, he could never help me. He denied ever knowing any foreign languages, but he was absolutely fluent in French. And because of the work he did, he was actually asked by his commanding officer, I'm assuming, to stay on after the national service, because he would then get a good job and a secure job. But Dad didn't want it. He wanted to live in the community.
So when did, with your illnesses and his, when did you put together that it was probably related to being at the tests?
Dad's, I asked, Chris, I can't remember his surname. He was one of the medical people with Dad. And I said, it's got to be, it's so strange, you know, it's so rare for the men to, or a man to have this nerve just suddenly disappear in essence. And he explained that he thought it would be radiation. And when I said about to Chris about Dad's hands and that when he was on Christmas Island, he said that could well be a cause of it.
How old were you when Rebecca?
I would have been about 18, I suppose, by then.
Oh, wow.
And I, as I say, Dad died in 2010.
How old was he?
He was born in 1934. So he would have been, what, 70, I'm trying to work it out.
34 to when?
2010.
So it'd be 77.
Yeah.
No, 76.
Yeah. Not what I'd call an old man. But also, the other thing that came tripping along was Mum from nowhere had breast cancer, and that went on to all of her women's parts, I would say, her reproductive side, all had got cancer, and then it came back in her bones, and she died. And she died in 1991, March 1991, and she was born in 1937. And that was horrible to see, and Dad couldn't deal with it. He wouldn't let me get the Marie Curie nurses in to deal with it and help him. So I stopped work and took a sabbatical in my teaching, and stayed with Mum until she died, and I looked after her. And she didn't want for anything, really. It's one of the best 3 months of my life in a rather strange way, but it just felt lovely.
I can imagine it's bittersweet. That's a beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, to be with.
We spoke of everything and anything, and she was my best friend anyway. And it was, and to see her going through what she was going through, you wouldn't have let a dog go through that. And to an extent with Dad, it was getting like that. And then, as I say, I became ill, and then I had ovarian cancer, which hasn't been too great.
Did you and your, so when you realized that it was definitely connected
to me it was, yes.
And did you talk, and you did speak to your father about
I
that?
asked him to pursue it.
And what did he say?
No. I did find out he'd bought if I say a dummy medal, a medal that they could buy. I don't know where it is now, I haven't got it. I wasn't interested in it, I wanted it for him, and I wanted a proper medal for him. Because although he wasn't a cuddly dad, I didn't want for that much. He provided, and I was happy with that.
So you would like to see them get their recognition, correct?
I feel so strongly that they deserve a medal, and I don't understand with some of the awards that are given out to people, I don't know, actors, actresses, people in government, whatever. These men saw and went through horrors, and it ruined their lives. It largely ruined their family lives, because I do remember being sent down to Kent to camp with my cousins. My father had a sister, and she had a little tiny farmy bit, and Dad would say, you can go down there and sleep in a hay bale house, that's fine, but it's nothing to do with me. You can go, I don't want anything to do with it. And he wouldn't relax and let things go, and yet when something like, for want of a word, taken on the government, but not just for him, for everybody that served and saw service there, they really deserve the medal. And I don't mean this being miserable. My life has been so affected by something with how my DNA is. That's been affected. And what comes along and affects a person's DNA, we don't know. What makes somebody still stay irradiated, I don't know. But sure as eggs are eggs, I'm living with a diagnosis that not even the senior people at LABRATS know of, because I've only been told it within the last week. But it's affected my life as well, and my children's lives. My eldest daughter, she's severely autistic. She's, quote, different. And for a long while when she was younger, although I'm a qualified teacher and I lectured in art history and art at university level, they wouldn't listen to me when I said she was autistic. And it took me about 8 years to get the schools to recognise that she is a girl and she's autistic. She's hiding it, she's a girl. And then as she got older, certain social situations she couldn't handle. And it seems really strange to me. I've heard of other people that have had grandchildren that have had problems. Well, there's another life that has been affected. It's a big ripple action, and it really, must stop any future testing, interventions. It's senseless and cruel on the people. And the men, they're on national service. They're told to jump, they jump. How high? Okay, I'll jump that high. They didn't have any choice. And I read on an article written by some people on a committee to do with the government that actually admits that they were used as guinea pigs. The first few men that went out to grapple and things like that, they thought they'd lose some. They didn't know if they would, definitely would, but they thought on probability they would. So they were guinea pigs. Doesn't that come with it a responsibility if you're going to make somebody into a living guinea pig and his family? I think it does. And I think it is something that the government must hold their hands up with. And I have no faith in Boris Johnson doing anything. You know, there's always something else, there's always something else. It needs to go much higher, and people actually listen. It isn't the tests and rigour and all the rest of it to get the medal. Just read reports, speak to the few that are left, speak to their families, and those men couldn't have done or given any more for their country. And that is my strongest belief. And it is my strongest belief with my daughter with autism. And I have another daughter who is a very, very clever girl, but she has mental health issues herself, and used to at university seemed to fairly regularly self-harm. Well, where's that come from? You know, psychologically she's not too well at times. But Charlotte is the one that is mainly affected after myself. But at the end of the day, I loved my dad, and I'd love to give him a hug. And when he died, he told the nurse, because he had a ruptured aorta, and he said to the nurse at St Thomas's, please ring Sue at home if I don't make it. And this nurse rang me up, and I can tell you now, Merlin was on the television, and it was a Saturday early evening, and she rang me up, and she said, is that Suzanne Eades-Willis? And I said, yes. I said, you're working late, because I thought it was to do, because I'm treated down in St Thomas's, and I thought it was to do with me. I didn't have a clue that Dad was ill at that point, with what was wrong with him. And she said, I'm ever so sorry, but your father's just died, and he doesn't want anybody else to know except you, and for you, when you're ready now, to tell his wife and my brother that Dad had passed, which I thought was rather ironic in one way, because he knew my brother and I are totally, we don't communicate at all. And his stepmother, she should have been with him if he was going to potentially run the risk of dying. And I had to be very careful in telling her, because I had to be kind, because at the end of the day, she'd lost her husband, but I had lost my dad. And I'll never stop loving him, I'll never stop missing him, because he was my dad.
Please recognise it, because it's not just us, there's hundreds, and it's not fair. And you don't have to do anything but just say, yeah, okay, there were issues, we're sorry.
Please tell me about when you would talk to your grandfather about the atom bombs, and please talk about...
I wanted to know more because I like history. And the answer was no, maybe another time, no. And he showed me his medal, the one that you can buy yourself as opposed to issued by the government as such. And he showed me by slinging it in the drawer. There it goes. And that was it.
And when did you start thinking that maybe having autism and other things were related?
I wasn't diagnosed till I was in my early teens, and I thought probably from my mid-teens onwards.
And you think that this is related to...
I'm 100% sure it's related to the atom bomb test, because like people like my social worker don't understand it, because I score badly or highly depending on how you word it in one area, and yet I'm able to do my masters in photography, and yet in other areas I completely can't function. And normally there's difference in your different areas, but normally you're within a range, set range for everything, whereas I score very differently in certain areas.
And please describe to people again what problems you have.
I have autism, I have anxiety and depression, both long term.
And you please say your name again.
Charlotte Mary Eades-Willis.
Charlotte Mary Eades-Willis, you've done a terrific job.
Thank you.
And if you want to say again to anybody that's listening, what would you tell them?
Just recognise us, accept us, and say thank you. Give them a medal and recognise the legacy that as it goes down the families, it doesn't go away.
Yes, it's not ancient history, is it?
No, the medal will recognise the men, yes, which is really important, but there's a story after the men that also needs recognising.
Special go-to person is my daughter Charlotte. She is an amazing girl. She's faced so many challenges. She's had to work so hard to achieve and get what she has now. And everything she does with kindness, thought, and thought for other people, not herself first. And she says the dogs and the cats are her favourite. But I don't know, I think she has a small holding, and on the small holding she has her own little herd of golden Guernsey goats. And secretly, I think there might be the odd favourite in there for Charlotte as well.
So I'd say unfortunately my sister couldn't be here today, but me, my mum and my sister have a really close relationship, don't we? The three of us, the three musketeers. And then my sister's been able to move on more and develop her own family unit. And then that's left me and mum, and we're really strong together. I think the problems make us stronger, but I reckon if you put me and mum together, you'll get a full person. Because mostly my body works properly, and mostly mum's mind works properly. So if you put us together, you'll get one.
I'd do anything for her because she always pays back more, and just seeing her face and seeing the difficulties she's gone through, and she's learnt to drive her car. Yes, we had to go for an automatic driving licence, but she learnt to drive her car, and she now drives my car, and that's fine by me because I don't always want to drive.
But we're just really close. Like, I didn't get the close relationship with my grandfather, but I have it with my mum and my sister, and
Yeah.
I know the three of us really do make a formidable team.
Yes, Emily skipped. She was a naughty girl. She's in her first year of doing her A-levels at her school, and she bunked out of school with a friend who is currently her chief bridesmaid to be, and had a tattoo done, and she did a spray of stars, and I like blue colours, red colours, yellow colours, as a little thing just on the side of her hip on her back, quite low down, and she had 3 musketeers written into it. And she always says, "Mum, I feel you there," with my tattoo. And
She brought you a pin brooch so that she
Yes.
could be here today without being here.
No, it's not.
that's my little hair.
And I know you
I
wouldn't,
brought it with me.
if Emily wasn't in your life, you'd be devastated,
I'd be
you'd never be
devastated.
happy.
Okay.
I'm Charlotte Eades-Willis.
And I'm Suzanne Eades-Willis.